your girl AP, and I'm here with my lovely co-host Nimade for another episode of More Than My Size.
Hey guys, it's Yumade, that African butterfly. We know we've been away for a few weeks, a little bit here and there. It's because we have been living life. Alicia and I both moved actually, so we've been dealing with that. But now we are back and better than ever and ready to jump into this week's topic, which is Bonnetgate. And I will let Alicia take it off.
So if you guys have not been buried under a rock, you've obviously heard this whole debate that has been sparked on the internet streets of, is it ghetto or appropriate to wear a bonnet out of the home? And there seems to be like a huge divide. And this was all sparked by Monique. And if you're not familiar, Monique was a stand-up comedian, also a TV and a movie actress who came out in the early 2000s. Her whole persona was built on being loud, fat, proud, and saying whatever she felt like saying. And of course, the F skinny, whatever, women. And we've seen Monique grow and evolve over these years and change her opinions on things and her disposition, which is totally fine. I believe in autonomy and growth. But what I'm not a fan of is policing other women. And of course, I believe respectability politics are really rooted in anti-Blackness, especially when we are deeming things ghetto. It's ghetto when Black women do it, but when people of non-color do it, it's okay. And that's problematic. And so the whole stance on wearing a bonnet out of the house, to sum it up, she basically said it makes us look as if we have dropped our crown and some things are in the house and not for everybody to see. And she, basically said, sometimes you got to tap your sister on the shoulder and just let her know, are you okay? Lift your crown or, let's do better. And I thought all of that was absurd. I would be completely 100 about that. I am a fan of, if it's my close friend and I think they're personally going through something, of course, asking, hey, are you okay? But going up to a complete stranger on the street or in the store and telling her that she can do better because she has a bonnet on her head is out of this world, just absurd. And the fact that we're still looking at people that we don't know and deciding what type of person they are because of what they may have on in one moment is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And I'm more upset when Black people do it, because of all the people in America who knows what it feels like to be decided who we are and what we are before we open our mouths, why would you want to exert that energy on other people? It blew my mind. And it just sparked a bigger conversation on the internet where people are weighing in, and there are half the people who agree that don't go out of the house in a bonnet. It's not for the home. It's not for out of the home. And then there's the other half who are very much like me, who are like, no, sis, do what you're going to do, because in no way, shape, or form have I ever worn a bonnet out of the house and felt ghetto. And if that's how you want me to feel, it's not going to happen. And when I see other women wearing scarves or bonnets, I don't look at them and feel like they're ratchet and ghetto. What is your take?
So I have a lot of opinions about this. My first and foremost one is that I just don't understand why people feel like they have to make up the story in their mind about who this person is based on what they're wearing. Like, what does that really say about them? You don't know what they're doing with their day, with their lives. And honestly, do you really care? Do you really care? And speaking to that, it's why should the person who is wearing the bonnet give a flying hoot about what you think or what anybody else thinks? I think it's really hard for people, especially more so for older generations that have been really raised to strictly think about their appearance to the world, how things come across, how things look. And it's that very logic that's created so many problems, because there's all of that, don't speak about this, keep this behind closed doors, keep this in the family, don't talk about this outside of the community. Because there's so much around caring how you look to other people, they still have that mentality. So when they see someone in a bonnet, yes, that's for the home or blah, blah, blah. But that person wearing it probably doesn't care, because you don't know. Maybe they are being lazy and a bum. It still is not your business and it doesn't matter to you. Or maybe the only times I've ever worn a bonnet out is if I am on my way to an event or something and I want to make sure my hair looks cute before I get there, and I didn't plan on getting out of the car, but maybe I needed to stop and get something real quick. Like, do you think I care in those 10 minutes what anyone I run into in that store thinks about me having in a bonnet? Absolutely, I do not. I really don't. And it's interesting because sometimes people will be like, well, especially because I, as a single woman, people like to put on my shoulders that I should be living my life always on the brink of if I find a man. So they'll say, like, like, well, what if you ran into your future husband in the store and you were wearing a bonnet? I'm like, well, my future husband wouldn't care. Like the type of guy who's gonna see someone in a bonnet and make all these opinions and think she's ghetto and think she's that, I promise you, is not the type of guy that I will be marrying or that I would want to marry. So
My
he's,
husband's never tapped me on the shoulder like, Queen, pick up your
yeah,
clothes. Went outside
yeah,
and did it. He doesn't care. He doesn't
right. I
care.
mean, some people care, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with you feeling how you feel. There, even if you want to say, like, oh, I see people in bonnets and that looks ghetto to me, fine. Well, the problem is when you don't keep it to yourself. The problem is when you feel like you ever have a right to go up to a stranger and tell them what they should do about their lives. And I had got into it a little bit with someone on Facebook about this because I was like, let people live their life and stop. And we shouldn't judge others because you don't know. Like maybe that person worked a long shift and they're on their way somewhere. Like I said, like sometimes I'd be like on my way to an event. Like you don't know, so why judge? And the lady was like, well, the Bible teaches us that the younger should teach the older and, blah, blah, blah. And we're just trying to show people the right way. And I think it's hard for people to understand, like, what is the right way? And I say this a lot about a lot of subjects. I know I do, but it's just so much trying not to use some French with it. So much of it is just BS, right? Like so much of our rules and what's right and what's wrong and what's okay and what's not okay is really just like what we as a society have decided. And that's why it changes over time. And that's why it's different in different cultures. And that's why I think people don't need to get themselves wrapped up in a knot trying to make everybody else happy. Like figure out what makes you happy and just go from there. So if you have an issue with people wearing bonnets out, don't wear a bonnet out. Simple as that. Raise your children not to wear bonnets out, but don't go to a stranger.
Don't go to a stranger, but also teach your children that though this is how we do things, there are going to be people in the world who don't do things the way that we do, and that's okay too.
Yes, and that reminds me. Oh, I was going to say I wanted to speak on another point you made about like the ghetto-ness and the respectability politics because it absolutely is that, and it's really unfortunate because even as we try to be like Black power and stand in your strengths and stand in your blah, 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 we still are very much raised in a culture that is white is right, right? So the closer that you can assimilate yourself to whiteness, the better you are, the more right you are. And anything that like the further away from that you are, the more you're doing something wrong or bad, which is why ghetto is an insult.
That is a really big thing that I really dislike is the whole it's ghetto. Because we're calling it ghetto because I think culturally, and we may not even realize it because it's where we're raised, but so much of our culture in America is based upon trying to achieve, like you said, assimilation or acceptance by European standards. And that dictates a lot of how we view certain things. Like when we think about the literal term of what ghettos meant, it was like living situations, right? Like being piled up in spaces because they didn't have enough space. But when I look at the only thing I will ever call ghetto is the projects. And that's literally because they're like that. And in joking, I might say, oh, you're ghetto. But when we look at like living, even the based upon where they got these ideas about what was ghetto, I'm sorry, but Black folks in those situations were incredibly savvy, were finding creative ways to take care of their families, to do things in an efficient manner within the restrictions and confines that they had. So if that's ghetto, like I'll eat that and I'll take that. So, but the fact that we're assigning like physical things to be ghetto, like, oh, your hair is ghetto, oh, your bonnet is ghetto, or this, like, I don't.
But it goes back to that scale of like, if it's more on one side, it's right. And if it's more on the other side, it's wrong. And ultimately, at the end of the day, even as much as race is an issue in this country, the economic scale is an even bigger one. So the closer you are to poverty, the worse you're seen. And that's in every culture. So for us, it's ghetto. For white people, it's white trash. And it's really saying that I feel like I'm in a place where I can look down on you because you are a lower economic
Is
standing than
that
me.
the
That's really what you're saying when you say that someone is ghetto.
And I think when Monique was saying like, oh, you tap her on the shoulder and you give her uplifting words, you should never be looking at anyone and thinking that they are in a lower space in their life because
Right. Yes.
on their head when they left the house. I thought
That part.
her explanation of like why she's saying what she's saying, and there's a couple things you touched on, like when we talk about the Bible saying that the elders are supposed to bestow wisdom upon the younger generation. I absolutely agree with that. But in no situation did it say, elders, go up to the strangers in your community and just go assault their character, because
Like there's a time and a place for
there's
everything.
a time
There's
and
a
right.
time and a
Like
place
I
for
said, if
everything.
you're talking to your child or someone in your family and you want to have a conversation with them, if they're open to it, by the way, about
your sister circle, whatever.
Feel free to do that, but not to absolute strangers. And the fact that we're still thinking that it's okay to judge someone that you don't know in a split second based off how they look is absurd to me. And she stated these stories about these two women who approached her at two different spaces in her life about getting herself together. And had she taken the approach that the internet has taken to her statement, she would have never gotten to a better place. And one of the stories, as I was telling you earlier, was that Patti LaBelle like ran into her at an award show or something like that, and she tapped her on her shoulder and basically was like, you got to get that weight off of you. Her using that story as like a reasoning piece as to why she feels the way that she does about approaching this subject the way that she did is absurd, because there's so many things wrong with what Patti LaBelle did there. She was flat out inappropriate for telling somebody else that they need to get that weight up off of them. If Monique felt like that was okay for her circumstances, that's fine. But sis, you can't do that with everyone. And that's
nor should you. That's where you need to get to the point. Like, nor should you. No matter how right you think you are, because at the end of the day, everyone's going to think that, even though they shouldn't, because it's really more so preference than rightness. But whatever, you want to stand in the fact that you're right, that's fine. But it's still not your job or your place to force that on other people if they didn't ask you. And people just really need to get to a spot where they need to learn to keep their mouth shut more. Like we all need to. Not everything you think needs to be said. Not every opinion you have needs to be shared. And I think so many of us are in this social media digital world where you can, and hey, I'll tussle in the comment section sometimes myself. But like, so you get in this space where you think like, oh, my opinion is valued, or my opinion should be heard, or what I have to say is important. Sure is. So make a space for you to say your opinions and your thoughts and all that stuff. You don't need to go up to strangers and feel that you have a place to tell anybody what they should do with their time. And I think about it because even as we talk about it, like, oh, lift this person up, like you said, how do you know they're down and need to be lifted up? Like you don't know what's going on in their life. And the fact that you think that means that you're automatically seeing them as being down. Right. And how would we feel like, as much as we're telling like, oh, lift each other up, how would they feel if like, imagine if a white person went up to a black woman and said something about their bonnet. Like it'd be a problem because it's none of their business. But you know what? Even though we're the same skin color, it's none of your business either. Like I understand wanting to have this sense of community, but this isn't like the biblical times where your town and your community was like the same 10 to 20 people you grew up with your whole life. So now when you see strangers, leave them alone. It's not that hard.
I think the interesting thing is, I recently saw bonnets are now on sale with like, they're being sold by H&M and they've jacked the price up. And Anthropologie, I believe, is one of them who was selling them, and other white brands, are selling these bonnets, and they're also selling them for way more than you can get them in a hair store. And now it's like high-end fashion, right? And that to me speaks volumes to why it's been deemed ghetto, right? And even more so than that, I really feel like we spend so much time having to combat stereotypes, people assuming things about us, especially when you are in a marginalized body, whether you are disabled or whether you're Black or a person of color in this country. We're constantly having to fight against stereotypes, and we're constantly having to try to assimilate so we can just get the bare minimum. You know what I mean? So to have it come from another Black woman feels so insulting. And I feel sorry for her that Patti LaBelle said that to her, and it made her feel like there was a thing that made her want to get her act together. I've never been insulted and felt like I need to get my act together. Like, that does not work for me. And maybe that works for other people, that does not work for me. So if you approach me and I have a bonnet out, I'm going to tell you right now, mind your business, sis. Think I'm ghetto, think whatever you want, but don't come tell me, mind your business. Because I am adult enough to understand that people got things going on in their life that I know nothing about. And especially if you're an absolute stranger, I have no business.
I just don't understand what goes through. Like, I have never felt a part of me that felt the need to tell a stranger something about themselves. Like, there's, even if I looked at them, I was like, what the hell is going on over there? Like, I would never feel like it was my place to go say something to them. Like, unless you are literally about to get into physical harm or danger, there's nothing that you, person I don't know, can do in your life that makes me feel like anything about me needs to encroach upon that or say something to that or affect that. Because I don't know your life. I don't know your life.
I think what's crazier is that I think we judge naturally as imperfect humans. We see things and we think things upon observation. We can't help ourselves in that situation. But when you go past thinking it and then saying it out loud and saying it out loud to somebody who did not ask you, I think that's where we're crossing a line. And that is a thing that I think is so bothersome. And even more so as I was reading the comments and reading the things people were saying, there are some who have had the privilege of growing up in affluence and experiencing life in a very different way than somebody else. With that, they think down on other people and they don't even know it. And that in itself is problematic, is that you could be in that position and still find yourself judging someone for not even having what you had or the privilege of having.
Well, no, it's absolutely a real thing. And it's something that I've talked about before on my page, because my thought process and where I am with things like even like race and money and things like that has been a very conscious journey. Like, I, growing up in the suburbs, and grew up with a very different mentality of how I look at even like other Black people and Black people from the city, and like, they don't try hard enough, they don't work hard enough. Like, I very much was like very in that mindset growing up. And it's also why part of me tries to like bridge the gap between it, because I know people who grow up with that thinking. It's not like they purposely think down on Black people. It's not like they purposely are like, I dislike Black people. It's that so much of what they're fed into through media and then through their society and their surroundings tells them that Black people are this certain type of way, or, those stereotypes are true for a reason. So unless they're like actively working to dismantle that, that's their baseline thinking. So I remember, like, I literally had to work to think of people who are like more hood and more ghetto and be like, hey, just because they speak that way doesn't mean they're less intelligent. Because literally that's how I grew up. Like, they didn't speak proper. They didn't care about education, blah, blah, blah. Like, I had to work to be like, hey, they're still really smart.
You grew up in upstate New York. I grew up in Connecticut. So the energy is very much the same. And even my own mom raising me to always speak and articulate. From the time I was a child, my mom always talked to us about how we spoke. And it's something that stuck with me. So at 36, I'm not going to undo the way that I speak, but I've also learned in the process to not assume someone's intelligence based upon, vernacular and colloquialism.
But you probably had to learn that. Because it wasn't what you grew up with, because that's how it was for me. And the problem is, like, glad you took that journey. Glad I took that journey. A lot of people don't take that journey. A lot of people spend their whole life with that mentality of, if they speak a certain way, if they look a certain way, if they do this, then they are these things. And it's unfortunate because they miss a lot of really great gems that can come from people from a different culture, whether it's a different race or just somewhere different on the economic scale. They miss out on that because they're so busy judging the outer appearance, and we need to get past that.
I think what made all of it even more funny was that she gave this speech from her home in her robe, which many would argue robes are not for outside now.
Right.
Technicality, she wasn't outside of her home, but you opened millions into your home. So now you have put yourself on
in a robe
display with a robe, no bra, whatever, looking like you just rolled out of bed. to give this don't look like you roll out of bed commentary when you go outside the house. Your only argument is that you did it from inside your home, but when you let the entire nation into your home, well, guess what? World, basically, is just as bad as you going outside, correct? So you could have, if you really cared that much about image and how one should be perceived, look at the amount of people who have seen her running around because she works out and things like that, or in her workout gear. There are plenty of people who would say there's a time and place for anything, everything. You shouldn't be in your workout gear on camera, blah, 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 unless you're doing A, B, and C. Like, we can start throwing out nuances all over the place. My thing is, do what feels right for you without ever having to look down upon somebody else for what it is or how they do things. Because what this conversation opened was a larger door to a conversation about how people really have trash behaviors when it comes to other people.
Well, that's why I'm glad that she did that post. Like, because at the end of the day, you know me, because I've gotten with people on your page who say stuff about what you post. Like, I feel like people's pages are like their homes. They can post what they want. They can say what they want. And I'm the queen of, like, if you want to post it, like, make your space to say it. So I will really go after someone for like something they posted on their page because it's just an opinion, because my page is full of my opinions that people could easily tell me that I was wrong about. So I don't have it fault with her wanting to get out her views or expressions because that's how she feels. Right. Even though I disagree with her, I completely disagree with her, but I don't have fault with her saying it. I have fault with the people who feel like, who think the same way she thinks, and then feel like they can take that out there and put it on strangers
and double down on it.
That's my issue.
Like, you know, I even had a conversation with one of my close blogger boots, because she's on the opposing side. She feels like, you know, you don't wear bonnets, and I explained to her my stance, and she's like, yeah, but the many times that I've seen it done, it's, you know, girls out here in their bathrobes and this, that, and the third. And I'm like, it doesn't matter.
It still doesn't matter. Like, that's my thing though.
Like, why are we assuming who someone is based on a fraction of what you see them do in their day? Like
my thing, Alicia, is like, how do people have the time? Like, who has, like, if I'm out and doing something, I'm doing something. You know what I mean? Like, maybe if I'm sitting and waiting and like just people watching, but even then I don't have that much time to make up a narrative about somebody in their head. Like, I see it and it just, okay. Like, unless it's something really outrageous, it's like, okay. And then
the thing, like, this conversation was with a plus blogger, right? And I saw a lot of other, you know, plus women in the space speaking up. Like, yeah, you don't do that, that's ghetto. And here is my reasoning with this. This was my reasoning. I'm like, do you, as a fat person, you know what it feels like to have strangers decide your health for you, right? Or you must be lazy because you have all that weight on you. You don't exercise, you don't eat right, you just want to kill yourself. You just want to, we hate that when those assumptions come about it. So the fact to see so many plus size women in the space come forward and be like, yeah, that's ghetto because she's doing this. And I'm like, you don't know, sis, you saw her for 5 seconds walking into a Walmart or Target or wherever, and you decided this about her. But I've seen some of you have tears online crying about how people treat you because you're fat. Like, and that is my thing. As marginalized people specifically, or for anyone who's ever experienced having something said about them that wasn't true, and it was just a bare assumption, how awful that made you feel, or annoyed, or angry, or upset. Why do you want to put that energy out there for anybody else?
Well, I mean, it just goes back to self-projection, right? And something that I live by, which is that when people say stuff about other people, it says more about them than it does the people they're saying stuff about. So like even with marginalized bodies, you'll often find it's people with marginalized bodies who are the most relentless about picking on people with marginalized bodies. Like, it's the fat person who is relentless about picking on the fatter person because at least they're not that size, because they have such a distaste for inside of them for what they're carrying around. So even with like the policing of other people's body, I really do feel like that comes from sort of the same place. Not so much like a self-hatred, but it comes from a person who, to me, just my opinion, is walking through life very conscious of their appearance to other people. Like, it is the forefront of their mind. It's usually also I don't leave my house without a face on people. And because that takes up so much of their mind, their space, their thoughts, the fact that it wouldn't take up someone else's mental space is frustrating to them. Like, it's like if I'm walking around here constantly having to put myself together so I look good for all of you, how dare you come out in the street not putting yourself together for me? Oh, the disrespect. Like, that's, to me, with the mental gymnastics that's happening in their mind, because how else do you explain why you're upset about what someone else does? It's literally like this whole, oh, well, if I can't do it, you can't do it either. And I'm mad at you for doing it. Because the rest of us who don't care as much what other people think, we don't care either way what you do.
You made such a great point when you were like, it's usually like the smaller fat making fun of or, harassing the larger fat. It's absolutely true. It's a way, it's a means for one to validate themselves for how they feel about themselves or how they need to feel. But I've always been taught since I was a child, people who do that, it says less about you than it does them. At the end of the day, I'm not even knocking the women who don't want to wear a bonnet out the house because that's their right to. And I even understand where the conversation has come from, especially generationally from our mothers and grandmothers and things like that.
But can we also add though, really quick, can we also add that they're also taking these contexts of like, this person is rolling through a store, dropping their kids off at school. Like, those, like, if you were telling me women were wearing bonnets to sit in church and women were wearing bonnets at like graduation ceremonies, it's still their business to do whatever they want. But then I can understand being a little more like, what the heck? But a woman just out running errands, living her life, like, we're really going to put that much thought into someone making a quick grocery run or dropping their kids off at school?
Arguments. There were women who were like, you shouldn't do it in the airport. One woman gave an example of how she had an opportunity to connect and make a business deal with someone she met in the airport because she was dressed a certain way. And I'm like, but I guarantee when I'm rolling through the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning with my children in tow and my husband is trying to make sure the kids aren't running off somewhere, the last thing I'm concerned about is making a business deal.
Right.
And I still made connections with people in public spaces with bonnets on my head looking less than appropriate.
And you know what? You make the connections with the type of people you should make the connections with. And like those people who are connecting with you while you are in your most natural state are the type of people you want to have connections with, quite honestly.
Because I know that you're not basing it on something superficial. Like, we've obviously had a conversation and you felt moved or compelled by what I've said, and that has put you in a space of feeling like, yeah, I would like to work with this person. I think, yes, to a certain extent, there is a time and a place for it, right? So no, I'm not going to go into my place of worship with a bonnet on. I'm not. But if somebody showed up in my place of worship with a bonnet on, I'm not making any assumptions about them still. Still, I'm not going to go to a job interview with, a bonnet on. When I'm in my free time, in my free space, as long as my titties ain't hanging out from underneath my pajamas and my moo-moo, and you don't see my holy drawers, we good. We good. Right. You know what I mean? To put so much emphasis on it coming on the heels of Derek Jackson and his wife having their public appearance, and she had her helmet.
With her army of salvation, her helmet of salvation.
I can't hear helmet of salvation, and it's so funny because at service over the weekend we had a Bible discussion about the armor in the Bible, and as soon as they got to the portion where it was like the helmet of salvation, I'm like crying tears of laughter because in my head I'm just like, oh, she's ruined this for me forever. But even then, people were so upset because, she's on video with Derek Jackson with this bonnet on, especially on the heels of why they were there. And I'm like, do you feel like sis could be more embarrassed? Her husband has publicly humiliated her. Y'all worried about
her? And we're all worried about her bonnet. Yeah.
That was probably her over it face. That was probably really her helmet of, I just need to block y'all out. I'm putting it on.
But again, that speaks to the type of women who are worried about that. Like, I wouldn't have put on a bonnet to do that live, but I don't care that she put on a bonnet. It was just more amusing to me. But I can understand the type of woman who really puts that much value of her self-worth into her appearance and how other people take in her appearance. To that woman, her coming in a bonnet shows a complete lack of self-worth, a complete lack of caring, and shows that she doesn't even care that she's going on camera with this guy. So like, they just can't wrap their heads around like, how could you even, and why would you even? Because they can't understand on the flip side of it, when those of us say we don't care, that we really mean we don't care. we don't care. And I mean, you're human, so you might care a little bit sometimes for some things, but overall, collectively, we don't care.
And that's the thing. I think to sum up my final thoughts on it is just mind your business. I feel like that has been the platform of everything that I always talk about. At the end of the day, it's autonomy, quite honestly. It's one thing if somebody comes into your place of business and is trying to get a job with you, you have a right to decide based upon
Yeah.
your appearance whether you think they're a good fit for the job or not. That's if that's your business. Mind that part. But when we're just talking about being out in public, like I see things all the time that look weird. Yes, I may turn my head and be like, well, what is happening here?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm not approaching anybody to tell them. And I'm also not spewing it out into the world. And I often find that people who engage in that way, you get humbled in ways in your life that you would never expect. And when that happens, you sometimes don't learn that lesson until it's happened. I'm of the mindset that I'm not trying to get humbled any more than I have been in life. So
Right.
let me just mind my business and let me do what is appropriate for me and let me teach my children what is appropriate for them. And I'm so grateful that my husband and I, as much as we teach our children the way of life that we think is appropriate and what we believe in, we still teach them. Everyone is not going to agree with what you do. And you're not always going to agree with what other people do. But it's also not your place to judge or make, base your opinion on whatever people, strangers are doing when it has nothing to do with you. I encourage my children to mind their business all the time. And I think if more adults understood, and I think there's something that comes with adulthood, right? If you grow up being told children are to be seen and not heard, your opinion doesn't matter here, whatever, you can't wait to be an adult because then I can say whatever I want.
I
And
mean, that's kind of true. That's kind of true. I love adulting for that reason.
right. And there's a scripture that I always think of, and I tell my kids this all the time. All things lawful are not advantageous. So yeah, while you may have the freedom to do so. Is it really advantageous for you to open your mouth and say this? And in most instances, people know that it's not, but people are so self-absorbed that they still feel like they got to tell you what they're thinking, even though they know once I say this to this person, it's really of no value or benefit. I'm just saying it because it came into my head and I wanted to say it. And that's the worst behavior to me as far as I'm concerned when it comes to adults. Like, just mind your business.
I was gonna say, I think you're absolutely right. I think that that's something we should speak about more in another conversation or another episode as well, because there are so many things where people just open their mouth and speak, and it's like, why? You know what I mean? Like when you meet a new couple, like why are you at? Like, do you care when they're getting married? Do you care when those people are having their babies? Like, why are you in their business when you know you don't actually really care? But we're just so programmed to ask these questions, and no one really stops to think about how like invasive it is. Like we
Social
all need to
media
be
works too.
we all need to be reprogrammed in how we start conversations and interact with each other. Because a lot of the things we ask each other right now, not your business. And people may not feel comfortable talking about that. And so I think that you made a great point, which is mind your business. I know I live by the words, do you, boo? Like as long as your actions don't hurt other people too much, because no one's ever going to make everyone happy. But as long as you're not actively trying to hurt others, like do you, mind your business, worried about yourself. If you find yourself with a lot of free time to worry about other people's business, get a hobby. There's lots of nonprofits that need volunteers all the time. Like find something to do with yourself that makes you so busy you don't have time to be that worried about someone else's business.
And for my fellow Bible thumpers out there, in case you want to use the Bible as a reason to be judgmental or be up in somebody else's business, there's a beautiful scripture at 1 Thessalonians 4:11, which beautifully states, mind your business. Therefore, God has told you. So don't use that as an excuse to get up in anybody else's business. Mind it. And no one is telling you how you have to think or how you have to behave or any of those things. When you cross that line into someone else's business, don't get mad at what you get back. I would like to hear from you guys, though. Obviously, we would love to hear your opinion, whether it's on Bonnetgate, minding business, autonomy, whatever it is. Make sure you drop your comments down below. And of course, we're going to drop us with a question to whatever it might be. Make sure you're following us on More Than My Sides, the show, _ the show on Instagram. And of course, we try to drop videos every Sunday by 8 o'clock p.m. Sometimes it might be a different day, but life happens, we pivot. And make sure you come and you engage with us. And of course, you can catch us on Spotify. I'm in the middle of uploading new episodes to Spotify in case you're not a YouTube person and you just want to listen to me and Numade give you our melodious voices throughout the show.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
Bye, guys.